And so I welcome all of you who are joining the show today and have been on for the last few weeks. Dr. Marilyn Volker's passion in life is to invite all people from nursery school to nursing homes to learn information about their one and only body, honoring public and private parts by always being safe, physically, emotionally, and sexually. Her bio would take up most of this show, so I'm just gonna give you a couple of snippets of how she stays so true to her passion. She's on the board and faculty of the International Transgender Certification Program, which certifies professionals in transgender issues. She's a sexuality consultant and educator for thousands of people over the past 50 years, developing HIV and AIDS curriculum and training programs in schools, in a variety of addiction and trauma treatment facilities, community and professional organizations, corporations, state and nationwide, the national VA hospitals, the United States Air Force, and the United States Navy. Marilyn has taught monthly for 8 years deployed and returning soldiers, their spouses and partners as part of the Yellow Ribbon Program, known as Upbooting Your Relationships and Rebooting Your Relationships. Marilyn continues to present at VA conferences regarding sexuality and intimacy. And Jessica, a very proud activist, educator, philanthropist, and entrepreneur, utilizing her skills and talents to help make a positive difference in the world. Jessica's expression of her essence is evident in her involvement as Vice President of the International Transgender Certification Association, a recognized known leader in the LGBTQ+ community, engaging students and educators at universities and high schools through workshops, lectures, and stories. She's published a children's book. Jessica has facilitated transgender sensitivity trainings for Best Buy, AMC movie theaters, and other venues and offices. Each week, Marilyn and Jessica have taken us into the depth and breadth of the gender world. Today, they uncover the intricacies of society logistics as it pertains to legal information and job transitioning, both very poignant and timely issues as our government steps into transgender in the military and gender identity discrimination. With immense pleasure, I welcome you both with aloha. Alo means presence or share. Ha means the breath of life or essence of life. You both share the presence and essence of life with and for so many thousands of people. Mahalo hugs, which means thank you, hugs safely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure and an honor because we've known each other for so many years, Gillian, to put forth this and to be presenting with Jessica, who is my wing woman and has so much to offer. So we need to start, right, Jessica?
Yeah, we should, huh? We've got a lot of stuff to go over in just a mere short hour. So anyhow, thanks for having us here. We're really grateful to be here. And today we are going to talk a little bit about some of the legalities of the gender expansive community. And in specific, we're going to talk a little bit today about the treatment that is given to this community through the government. So we're going to go back and I'll show you some laws and things that have, come out over the last decade. We'll go quickly through this list here. You can actually look this up online if you just Google mapping transgender equality in the United States. This is a free document that you can find online. It's from the the National Center of Transgender Equality. But if you look over here in this map really quickly, it's here we're mapping transgender equality in the United States. So we're looking at the colors. So here we have green colors. The darker the green, the more policy they have on protecting transgender rights. And when we get into the red, that's where we see lots of negative policies. So as you can see here across this map here, there's a lot of red still. You know, the high equality states have laws protecting bullying and discrimination in schools. They have laws that allow access to medically necessary health care. And also policies on changing the name and gender marker on identification documents and being protected from being unfairly fired or evicted or refused access to public places. And red areas, the negative equality states, they're just the opposite. They're not protected from bullying or discrimination in schools, have very limited access to medical care, can't change their name or gender marker, and can be unfairly fired from work. So Sally's by sexual orientation and gender identity. So you can sort of see here the reds are still almost half across the board here. I'm going to just go quickly here. Over half of LGBT people live in the states with hostile or low gender identity tallies. So non-discrimination laws and policies. So you can see here, there's a lot of orange there, which is low equality. That means that there's progress being made, but you can sort of see, I mean, right there, there's the Bible Belt all in red. You can sort of see that right there. That's where we have negative equality. And I explained to you earlier what that meant. That meant there's no laws there to protect them. Here's laws and policies on LGBT youth. So we see lots of orange here, and there's some greens. So that's great. So when you see orange and green, that means that there is some progress being made. But now look at health and safety laws and policies. There's a lot of red here too. Identity documents, laws and policies. Okay, still lots of red here. And wow, look at this one on parenting laws. I think we're seeing some major progress here over the last couple years. Let's talk a little bit about transgender rights in the United States. So as far as marriage is concerned, in Oberfell versus Hodges, the SCOTUS ruled that people have a right to marry without regard to sex. Yay, right? While this is commonly understood as a ruling allowing same-sex marriages, it also meant that a person's sex, whether assigned at birth or recognized following transitioning, cannot be used to determine their eligibility to marry. Prior to this ruling, it's important to note the rights of the transgender people to marry was often subject to legal challenge, as with the status of their marriages after transition, particularly in cases where an individual's birth sex was interpreted to mean same-sex marriage had taken place. Same thing in parental rights. So there was little consistency across courts in the treatment of a transgender parent in child custody and visitation cases. In some cases, a parent's transgender status was not weighed in a court decision. In others, rulings were made on the basis of a transgender person being presumed to be an unfit parent. Could you imagine that? You know, because I identify as transgender, that makes me an unfit parent. It's more than just gender that makes you an unfit parent. And so courts are generally allowed to base custody or visitations only on factors that directly affect the best interest of the child. I can share a personal story around that. If you want to ask me a question on that later, I'll be glad to share with you my story on how I, as a transgender woman, was able to get custody of my children back in 2001 here in the state of Florida in Miami in a courtroom. So jot that down as something you might want to ask me later, and I'll be glad to answer that for you. Reproductive rights. Transgender people who haven't undergone complete sex reassignment surgery are still able to procreate. However, many U.S. jurisdictions require surgery in order to change the trans person's legal sex, and this has been criticized as forced sterilization. Some trans people wish to retain their ability to procreate. So in other words, let's say we have a trans man who still may have a uterus. Okay, just because they have a uterus doesn't make them a woman. It just means that they can carry babies. That's a man who can have a baby for all intensive purposes. And let's just say that in that state that they live in, the law says you cannot change your identity documents to say that you're male because you haven't had surgery to remove that. And in those cases, in order for them to have their identity match their gender identity, their documents, they would have to have surgery, which in effect is a forced sterilization on their part because maybe they do want to have babies. And we may have seen in the news in the past of trans men having babies and such. So Marilyn, you want to contribute along this lines here?
This is very important. Thank you so much. Because this is why you have your dream team. and you have a person like myself as a counselor to write information, or an endocrinologist who would say, if you're going to get surgery or hormones, do you want to save your sperm? Do you want to save your eggs in case you would also want to have a child from your DNA? So it's really important that everyone has people on their dream team. I mean, who is trained? That's what I'm going to say. So thank you. Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about identity documents. So identity documents are a major area of legal concern for transgender people. Why? Because different procedures and requirements for legal name changes and gender marker changes on birth certificates, driver's license. Just think about your own number of documents that are out there in the world that identifies you as you. I mean, in my case, if somebody asked me for my high school diploma or my college diploma, I'd have to furnish a diploma that has the name Jesus Lamb on there because that was what my male name was. And so if I had to present those documents there, and I can't go back and say, oh, excuse me, school, can you change the name on this for me? They won't do that. And so imagine that I would present this and they're going to look at me and say, oh, but that's not your name, but this is me. And then I have to come out and explain myself as being whatever. And because currently there are no laws that were passed through the US government to protect the rights of the transgender person, they could discriminate on hiring me at that job since I disclosed I was transgender, whether it was their business or not. Yeah, go ahead, Marilyn.
Yes. And now, of course, again, if you have the dream team, the teenager, if they're coming out, can we write a letter to the head of the school system so that the students could have their diploma in their chosen name? Okay. And that part is really important. That's why you have the dream team and get help. And but a lot of people don't go through that, and you're correct. I'm really glad, Jessica, that you're sharing that, because there are a lot of people who didn't have, I'm going to say, the gift of all of us working with them. So thank you.
Yes. And about name changes, transgender people often seek, of course, legal recognition for their name change during a gender transition. And laws about this regard is changes and varies from state to state. So in some states, transgender people can change their name, provided that their name doesn't, perpetrate any fraud or enable criminal intent. In other states, the process requires a court order or a statute, which makes it more difficult, of course. And some courts require medical or psychiatric documentation to justify a name change. So imagine that a woman who gets married wants to change her name, has no issues doing that, but because someone might identify as a different gender identity, they probably would have some issues changing that name. Now, most of the time, the courts are really looking at whether or not this person is looking to change their name for criminal reasons. Is this person running away from the law, or is this person trying to evade, being prosecuted in court somewhere, or a creditor? So they're looking for these sort of things. So that it makes it challenging. I remember going into the courtroom asking for my name change. This was back in 1999. There were no laws in the state of Florida to help me through this process at the time, and so I come up to the judge with my name change document, and it's funny that the judge would say to me, "Oh, I'm sure you just got divorced and you're looking to get your old name back, aren't you, young lady?" And I'm like, "No, judge, read the papers a little closer." and I should have been flattered at that point. And then he sees there the reason I was going. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, certainly we need to do something about this. And he stamps it, and I'm gone. But imagine, and fortunately for me, I'm what's called passable. Imagine if I wasn't passable, and what kind of discrimination I might have gotten in that courtroom if they saw me as a man wearing a dress that day.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for saying that, because, on the dream team, there could be doctors, there could be attorneys, because now we have, and now they didn't have that, and people in a school system willing, and counselors, and even family members who are willing to go through this. Just today, I just want to say that, in the name change, when you said that, one of the students wants to know if the religious leader, because this person is Christian and was baptized, would change the baptismal certificate in their chosen name and gender. So this is something that I have never really come across. So religious leaders could be on the dream team, ministers and rabbis and anybody who's in any religious organization. Yes, thank you.
Now, you can also imagine how difficult it must be for somebody who identifies as transgender, who has gone, through the process of transitioning, if they want to travel the world or leave the country and having passports that say their gender and their name, how important that might be, because when they walk into a new country, that based on that identification, it may mean the difference of being discriminated against or not. So the State Department determines what identifying biographical information is placed on passports. So on June 10th of 2010, the policy on gender changes was amended to allow permanent gender marker changes to be made with the statement of a physician that the applicant had undergone appropriate clinical treatment for gender transition to the new gender. So the previous policy required a statement from a surgeon, so they removed that part. Now the question was, who is the dream team? The
Yes.
dream team is the therapist, could be an attorney, could be a friend. These are the people who are in this transgender person's life, who support them and who help them through this process. So in that dream team, that therapist is the one that's going to write that statement on a paper to present to the courts to say, oh, this person is changing their name. So how do you find a dream team or establish one? Go ahead, Marilyn.
Yes, and it's you want to find the people who've been trained and who know. That's why our ITCA training that Jessica is just in charge of is so important to see who are our counselors, our doctors across the world, our endocrinologists, our attorneys, and the people who are the also the parents, the PFLAG groups across the world that are going to be supported. So that's how you want to get with people who have been trained, and they will know that. So stay in touch with us and be in touch with Gillian, because there we are. We're all in touch together as the dream team.
Yes, and I'm going to submit a new song to Sesame Street on "These Are the People on Your Dream Team." So, because that's what we need, right? So, let's talk about something really important here, which is driver's licenses, right? Why are driver's licenses important? It's so interesting that this piece of document, this identity piece of card that you have there with your picture and name on that, if you lived in the early 20th century, this was unimportant. Why? Because we didn't have many vehicles on the road back then. Even in the 1960s and 70s, it was not as predominant. You had one or you didn't. But now everyone is sort of required. If you don't get a driver's license, you get what at the DMV? An identification card. Now, US states allow the gender marker to be changed in a driver's license, although the requirements vary from state to state. So often the requirements for changing one's driver's license are less stringent than those in changing that marker on the birth certificate. For example, in my case, I was able to change my gender marker on my driver's license. Now, I went through some real difficulty doing that back in 1999, because in the state of Florida, there were no laws that were protecting me to allow me to change. Now, I had that ever so important piece of paper from the court that said my name is now Jessica Lamb and I go by female pronouns. But when I got to the driver's license to change that name and gender marker, they had a hard time changing the name. They had no problem with, but it was the gender marker they had a problem with, because there are no laws in the state of Florida that says that we have to do this for you. And since there's no laws, we cannot do this for you. So if you really want this, you need to petition. And I remember being ridiculed in that office, made a spectacle. I was crying. They pulled me into the supervisor's office, which was behind a clear glass wall. And I was there crying. People are looking at me, pointing fingers at me. What's going on with this lady over there? And I left just defeated because, okay, I had a driver's license that said Jessica Lamb, but it had an M. Why was that important to me? If I got pulled over by a police officer, and during those times, there could have been a police officer who may not have been friendly to somebody who was like myself. And what if they wanted to put me in a jail cell overnight for whatever reason, because I was doing something I wasn't supposed to? where would they put me? Well, based on my driver's license, I'd be a woman like this sitting in a male's prison. Now, what kind of danger would that put me in that situation?
That's right.
Now,
The
that
gender marker
changed
does.
later. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I went back over a week later and just defeated, but I was like, okay, I need to find somebody to help me with this. So trying to make the best of a situation, I go into a different driver's license bureau and decided to stand in line and wait. And I looked at the people behind the counter, and if I knew what a lesbian or a gay person looked like, that's what I was looking for behind that counter, to see if somebody would be sympathetic with me in that office. And I did. I saw a woman there that she looked, I thought she could probably be a lesbian and probably be okay with me. And I remember letting people pass me in this long line just to make sure that I got her at the window. When I got to the window, I gave her my driver's license, says, ma'am, I just got this last week and they put the wrong marker on there. And she looks at it and goes, oh, goodness gracious, that's true. Let's change that for you. And she sure did. And I walked out with a smile on my face. It's important for me to note now in 2021, there are laws that permit the transgender person to change their gender marker and their name on their driver's licenses. And we're going to look at that right now. So sometimes the state's requirements and laws conflict with and are dependent on each other. So for example, a trans woman who is born in Ohio but lives in Kentucky will be unable to have the gender marker changed on her Kentucky driver's license due to the fact that Kentucky requires an amended birth certificate reflecting that person's accurate gender. And the state of Ohio does not change gender markers on the birth certificate. So you could see that there could be a problem just living between states. However, as of 2007, tell me who didn't know this. As of 2007, the US federal government, it does not recognize a third gender option on passports or other national identity documents. However, there has been some progress at the state level to add this designation on official identification documents. So laws offering an X gender marker on driver's license and state identification cards have been passed in several US jurisdictions. So if you look over here in the blue, in those states that are colored in blue, there is a law that allows them to put an X designation on their driver's license if they identify as a gender other than male or female. Imagine that. And that the orange says that the law's been passed, but it's not enforced until 2024. And the ones in yellow, there was an entry date, but it hasn't been finalized yet. So this is something that they're working on. And of course, gray, no designation available.
It's so interesting because when we think of that dichotomy of only male and female, the X could be, I could be an intersex person and I could and there's no identification. And so I really like that you have this option as well. That's what the young people were talking about today. What if I'm in the middle? What if I have a different, chromosome pattern? What is that going to mean on documents? So, wow, that young people are talking about it. So, yay, let's move on.
And we'll talk a little bit in a second on some of other places outside of the United States that recognize that third gender, or that X, if you will. So let's talk a little bit about some of the federal laws. Now, there's no federal law designated transgender as a protected class or specifically requiring equal treatment for transgender people. Some versions of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act that was introduced to the U.S. Congress have included protections against discrimination for transgender, but as of 2015, no version of that ENDA has passed. So this is something that the community is working towards. As far as education, the Obama administration took the position that Title IX's prohibition on discrimination on the basis of sex encompasses discrimination on the basis of gender identity and gender expression. So in 2016, guidance was issued by the Departments of Justice and Education stating that schools which receive federal money must treat a student's gender identity as their sex, for example, in regard to bathrooms. So in other words, if there was a child who identifies as a trans girl, young trans girl, can go into the girl's room where she feels comfortable going. So, however, this changed after Obama left office, and I'm going to go over that in a second. Restroom access. So numerous jurisdictions and states had passed and considered so-called bathroom bills, which restrict the use of bathrooms by transgender people, forcing them to choose facility in accordance with their biological sex. This includes Florida, Arizona, Kentucky, and Texas. On March 23rd, 2016, North Carolina passed a comprehensive bathroom restriction bill, overriding a prior municipal Charlotte non-discrimination ordinance on the same subject. It was quickly signed into law, but on March 30, 2017, following this national controversy, because the trans community stood up and said, hey, hold on a second, this was reversed. In September 2016, California Governor Jerry Brown signed a bill requiring all single occupancy bathrooms to be gender neutral. So if you had a bathroom, it had to be gender neutral. This is what later became what we call the family restrooms. Effective since March 1st, 2017, California is the first U.S. state to adopt such legislation. Vermont, New Mexico, Illinois have followed suit in 2019, and we may see more. Go ahead, Marilyn.
And you know, this is really interesting because so many students are so scared about going in bathrooms, because if somebody has presented themselves, you know, as Miss Jessica has here, that what bathroom should Jessica go to? Well, hey, you know, if you go into, and do you know what anybody has between their legs in the bathroom? You don't. And when I work with the military, they go, holy cow, there's the woods. And also, if you travel around in other countries, they don't have male or female. So, but it gets to be really scary for a lot of young people, to the point where they do not go to the bathroom and they develop bladder infections, urinary tract infections, because they're so scared. They're so scared. So this is important to have that dream team as well for the school.
And here the flip side of things, which lead us into hate crime legislation.
Thank you.
So, imagine for a trans person, let's say they were forced to go into a room. I remember here in Miami-Dade County, Florida, I was asked to be a part of a group to go into the commission's office to ask for our rights to be seen and to allow us to use the restrooms we felt comfortable with. I mean, imagine me walking into a boys' room and that can possibly lead into a hate crime, because what if I walk in there and some man looks at me and says, oh, this is some trans person, and something happens from that. Federal hate crime legislations include limited protections for gender identity. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009 criminalized willfully causing bodily injury on the basis of an actual or perceived identity. 22 states plus Washington, D.C. now have hate crime legislation, which includes gender identity or expression as a protected group. For a long time, also, as far as the restrooms situation is concerned, the greatest fear was a man walking into the woman's restroom. Forget about the trans woman like myself walking into a men's restroom. It was about a man walking into a women's restroom. But if we were to pass laws like that, the trans men who may not have had bottom surgeries and still have maybe a birth certificate that says, female, they would be required to go into a women's restroom. We met Tommy last week. Imagine if Tommy was forced to walk into a women's restroom. So the idea of a man, and now Tommy, of course, is harmless, and he's a beautiful young man with a kind soul. But imagine what that might be perceived by maybe some woman who may have gone through abuse in a relationship somewhere, and all of a sudden sees a figure in that restroom that, like Tommy walking in there, who essentially is a man. He's a trans man. But these are some of the things that we need to think about when passing. It's a bathroom. It's who was it? Jazz Jennings once said, I walk into the stall, I close the door, I do what I gotta do, I wash my hands, and I walk out, and that's it. That same day at the commission, when I was there talking about my right to be in the bathroom I chose, I was scared that day, because I had the pastor of my church when I was an ordained minister at one point in time. This was the man who taught me the ministry, who ordained me as a minister. And I didn't transition at his church. I transitioned afterwards. And he had not met me as a woman, but there he was on the other side talking so many negative things about me, about the perversion that these transgender people have. And it's like my own father is the way I felt. It was like my own father was making me feel like some sort of miscreant when I'm not. I mean, certainly he knows my soul and my heart. And I was genuinely scared to walk into the restroom, so scared that a news crew noticed that I needed to go in, but I was a little concerned. And they said to me, listen, let's grab the news cameras and we're going to walk you right into the bathroom. And let's just see exactly what the experience of a trans person going into the bathroom is like. And exactly as Jazz Jennings described, I go in, close the door, do my business, come out, wash my hands, and walk out. Go ahead, Marilyn.
This is really, that's important because it's so scary for a lot of people and the dream team, because I want to, emphasize there was a program that a lot of people, and it said, go with me and go with me. Well, a lot of women, when they go in, they go, hey, I'm going to the bathroom. You want to go? And oh, I like your hair. And what about, the lipstick and all? But men do not talk. So trans men had to really recognize, oh boy, I'm going into a bathroom. You don't talk. No, 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 no. You do your stuff and you walk out. So there was a program called Go With Me. And the dream team would go in the bathroom. They don't have to say anything. They would just go in and out. And so, yes, it's very scary. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing your story.
And is it riveting news? No, not really. So, and will there be deviants who will, go in there and do something bad? Sure. I mean, there is that, but it is not the general and whole. So, for the sake of time, I'm going to rush us through some of these things. So let's talk about healthcare. Transgender people confront two major legal issues with the healthcare system. So that's access to healthcare for gender transitioning and discrimination by healthcare workers. So the ACA, as much as people have wanted to say many bad things about the Affordable Health Care Act, one of the things that particular policy, when it was passed, helped with was to remove pre-existing conditions which previously was used to discriminate against transgender people. So the Affordable Health Care Act, was a ruling that stated that discrimination based on gender identity was forbidden. So the ACA also forbidden insurance providers from refusing to cover a person based on being transgender, because sometimes they would not take them because they were transgender because it was a pre-existing condition. Military. In 2015, the Pentagon reviewed its policy regarding transgender service members and announced that its ban would be removed. It announced on June 30, 2016, that effective immediately, existing service members who came out as transgender would no longer be discharged, denied reenlistment, involuntary separated, or denied continuation of service simply because of their gender. And that's starting in July 2017, people who already identified as transgender were welcome to join the military so long as they had already adapted to their self-identified gender for at least an 18-month period. Now, there's more on this coming up in the next administration. And so we're going to forward into the future. So here's the 4-year timeline when the previous administration that just left office in January, when they came into the White House. So the White House administration's restrictions of transgender rights began mere weeks of the newly elected president, when Obama-era guidance on allowing transgender students to use bathrooms of their choice was rolled back. So almost immediately in February 22, 2017, Department of Justice rescinds civil rights protections for transgender students. October 4th, Department of Justice says this 1964 Civil Rights Act does not prohibit job discrimination based on gender identity, which gave the green light for bosses to fire transgender workers, right? More on this happening on June 15, 2020. In 2018, the government says it plans to erase civil rights protections from people. So according to a New York Times article back then, the New York Times reported the Trump administration planned to roll back protections that former President Obama had established for trans people. The proposed initiative would define gender solely based on a person's genitals. Okay. And so let's go on in 2018. So in October 21st, LGBTQ allies and advocates hold mass protests. This is when we get the hashtag won't be erased, and this is what went viral. And Noor Pervez, we fight so that our next generation of trans kids don't have to hold the fears of the world inside them, and the world is ours too. Here's a video on this. I'll let it play just a couple seconds here.
I know that inside I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, and it's what makes me happy. It's not okay for somebody to just say that I can't live the way I want to and I can't be myself.
I'm not going to be erased. They can't literally erase me unless they're going to commit genocide.
So pretty amazing that these young people came and said, listen, we won't be erased here. Moving into 2019, lawmakers from both chambers of Congress launched an attempt to reintroduce the Equality Act of 2019, which is the one that was introduced in 1974, which would enact a sweeping measure that would ban discrimination of LGBTQ plus in areas ranging from housing to public accommodations, thus amending our civil rights laws. Well, what happened to that? Well, the Equality Act passed the United States House of Representatives on May 17, 2019, in a bipartisan vote. Yay, we hear all about bipartisan these days. The United States Senate, however, back then received the bill for consideration on May 20th, 2019. And guess what? It's still sitting there. Nothing's happened with that bill. Our past White House administration opposed this Equality Act. So in August 2019, the White House had issued a statement. The Trump administration absolutely opposes discrimination of any kind and supports the equal treatment of all. However, the House passed bill in its current form is filled with poison pills that threaten to undermine parental and conscious rights. So moving forward, April 12, 2019, Trump bans on transgender soldiers serving in the military going into effect. These are some of the tweets he put out back then. So after consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming, there he is, victory, and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender people are a disruption, according to this president at the time in the military. So, this changes, and we're going to fast forward in a second and show you. But of course, this was an area of great distress for trans people in the military. Marilyn, did you want to make a comment on that?
Especially, first of all, there have been trans people who've always served in our military, but particularly when this happened, when people were serving and they didn't always just come out, that they were either non-transitioning at the time or in transitioning, and our VA hospitals were paying for hormones like they would pay for anybody's hormones who needed it, non-transgender or transgender, if they needed hormones. Okay, so the interesting part is that it got military folks who need to be focused and exactly on what we need to be doing as a team, talk about dream team. And it really got during that time about people looking at each other, which was very disruptive for a team working together. So we will see what happened with that. Yes.
So let's keep talking about what was going on during these 4 years. On May 24th, 2019, the administration proposes a rollback on ACA, the Affordable Health Care Act, non-discrimination policies protected in the marketplace and other federally administered insurance plans. That, in other words, bringing it back to pre-existing conditions that was preventing trans people from getting health care. And for a time, there was a great distress among the transgender community that I just got health care and now they're going to take it away from me. There was a lot of distress over that. October 14, 2019, the Department of Labor proposes a plan to let employers with federal contractors discriminate against LGBT workers. Imagine. 2020. Okay, so here's some good news. June 12, 2019, reversing the Affordable Health Care Act, which allows insurance companies to return to denying patients coverage for transition services. The rule focuses on non-discrimination protections laid out in Section 1557 of the Affordable Health Care Act. So that federal law established that it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability in certain healthcare programs and activities. In 2016, an Obama-era rule had explained that protections regarding sex encompassed those based on gender identity. So under the Trump administration, the HHS Office for Civil Rights proposed a rule, one that was finalized in June 2019, that reverses the one that the Obama administration had. So a leader in the administration was quoted in saying, "We're going back to the plain meaning of those terms, which is based on biological sex." June 15th, 2019, here's a Supreme Court delivering a major victory to LGBTQ employees. In a historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act protecting gays, lesbian, and transgender employees from discrimination based on sex. This ruling was remarkable in many respects. Nearly half the states having no legal protection for LGBTQ employees. Now the federal law will protect those employees in those states from being fired and other adverse employment decisions made on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So that was a major win. So now we cannot get discriminated against for being, gender variant, if you will. July 1st, 2020, the proposed housing and urban development rule would allow federally funded homeless shelters to judge a person's physical characteristics, such as height, facial hair, in determining whether they belong in a woman's or men's shelter. This idea of clocking a trans person. So if they clocked you as a trans person, they would put you in the shelter or the housing that they would identify you. So they were allowed, in other words, to discriminate against a person based on their appearance, which reversed the Obama era rule. So you can imagine how hard that must have been for trans people. Go ahead, Marilyn.
Oh, it's really extraordinary because if you think of every day that we go through and where we go into, so people who needed housing or people who are going to be renting housing space, and of course in prisons, correctional facilities, these are very, very important issues as well, and it can be quite frightening for a lot of people who are gender variant or transgender if it's
So,
only based on what's between your legs. Yes.
yeah, so as I'm going through all these laws and all these things happening in our government, now just put yourself for a moment in the shoes of someone who identifies as gender variant or transgender or non-binary, or part of this gender expansive umbrella. What kind of feelings are you feeling? How are you moving through this? Seeing a world that may not see you the way you feel that you see yourself. So it was a very difficult time for trans people, and there was a lot of distress in the community as we started to see a lot of the progress that was being made on protecting our rights slowly being taken away by this previous administration. On August 17th, 2020, more good news here. Federal judge blocks the Trump administration from removing non-discrimination protections for transgender care. So as soon as July, when they went to go take it away, here they are back on August 17th saying, hey, you can't do that. So, here are now we're having trans people standing up for themselves and saying, we have the right to be heard. The legal fight continues. The legal fight is still playing out as Trump administration has left the office. Former executive orders are being reversed by the new Biden administration, and rights are now starting to be restored. So here, let's go into now. So 2021, welcome the new year and a new administration in the White House. Less than a week into his presidency, President Biden signs an executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, directing the government to implement protections for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in the United States based on the Supreme Court's decision in Bostock versus Clayton County. So hooray, imagine now being transgender and seeing this in the news. January 25th, a mere 5 days later, President Biden reversed Trump's ban on transgender troops serving in the military, moving swiftly on a social issue as he broadly exerted the power of his office to prohibit discrimination against people based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Before signing this document, he announces to a camera, what I'm doing is enabling all qualified Americans to serve their country in uniform, highlighting on all qualified Americans.
Yes, this is what a lot of the military folks were saying, like, oh my gosh, are they going to be looking what's between our legs, or are they going to be going through a really intervention when I really just want to serve? I'm qualified, I'm trained, I passed boot camp, I've had years of experience, and now this was also very affirming to people as well. And it's not just about, let me just say, because not everybody can take hormones, so it isn't just about hormones. If I needed hormones, nobody's looking between my legs. They're going to be testing my hormones and seeing yes in here or no, or pros and cons. So it was very interesting to see what happened in the military when this reversal took place. A sigh of relief. I just want to serve my country is for people who were military focused. Yes, thank you.
So there's still a ways to go for our transgender community, or our gender expansive communities. These are some of the ongoing changes happening. Changes within the US government continue in the right direction, with transgender officials being assigned for the first time into high executive offices and positions. So check this out. Taylor Small elected to the Vermont House of Representatives as of 2021. Sarah McBride elected to the Delaware State Senate, the first time somebody who identified as openly transgender was a state senator. Rachel Levine, recently appointed by President Biden as the Assistant to Secretary of Health. Rachel Levine is a trans woman who is a pediatrician. Sean Skelly to the Department of Defense Transition Team. Wow, how amazing. So there's some progress in the right direction right now happening in the US government, but what's happening around the world? So we're coming down to the last 15 minutes here, so I'm gonna like go through this lickety split. So medically and socially, the term transsexualism is being replaced with gender identity or gender dysphoria, and terms such as transgender people, trans men, trans women are replacing the category of transsexual people. So transsexual is not really a term that we're using. And now we're seeing a shift as in our part one, we talked about gender expansive. So there's another shift into a more gender expansive. In Africa, the Constitution of South Africa forbids discrimination on the basis of sex and gender and sexual orientation. So Botswana in 2017, a high court ruled that the refusal of the Register of National Registration to change a transgender man's gender marker was unreasonable and violated his constitutional rights to dignity, privacy, freedom of expression, equal protection of the law, freedom from discrimination, and freedom from inhumane and degrading treatment. Imagine that, a law that prohibits from being inhumanely treated by the government. In Asia, China, 2009, the Chinese government made it illegal for minors to change their official listed gender, stating that sexual reassignment surgery was available to only those over the age of 20 and required in order to apply for a revision of their identification card and residence resignation. So there's still some room in China for things to change there. So there's still a very, tight laws against the transgender community there. In India, in April 2014, the Supreme Court of India declared transgender to be a third gender in Indian law. So the transgender community in India, made up mostly of Hijras and others, has a long history of the Hindu mythology. So Hijra is seen there in India in the eyes of the law as a third gender. So they can get an X on their identity documents, right? Iran, beginning in the mid-1980s, transgender individuals were officially recognized by the government and allowed to undergo sex reassignment surgery. And the government provides up to half the cost for those needing financial assistance. So as much as we might think Iran is so backwards, but look at how they're treating their trans people over there, and they even pay for their surgeries. And more in Asia, Japan, on July 10, 2003, the National Diet of Japan unanimously approved a new law that enables transsexual people to amend their legal sex. And since 2018, sexual reassignment surgery is paid for by the Japanese government, which is covered under their national health insurance policies. So, if I were transgender and needed an operation, maybe I'd want to move to Japan and become a citizen there. Pakistan, in 2018, Pakistan passed the Transgender Personal Protections of Rights Act, which implements transgender people's right and identity and anti-discrimination laws. Laws include recognition of trans identity in all legal documents, including inheritance. So in other words, you could not be denied an inheritance because you changed your sex. Philippines, the Philippine Supreme Court has ruled that Filipino citizens do not have the right to legally change their sex on official documents. So even if they're transsexual and have undergone sex, so there's work in the Philippines that needs to be done. In Europe, France. In France, there is currently no law that defines sex change procedures. However, it's possible to ask for a sex or a name change before the court. The judge decides it, or decides not to change it. So basically, a judge is the one who's going to tell you. And if you got a great judge, the judge is going to let you do that. In Germany, since 1980, Germany has a law that regulates the change of first names and legal gender. The law initially required them to undergo surgical alteration, but in 2011, it was unconstitutional. So they can change all this documentation when they transition. In Greece, 2017, the Greek parliament passed the legal gender recognition bill, which grants the transgender people the right to change their legal gender by abolishing any conditions and requirements such as undergoing any medical interventions. So in other words, you don't need letters from doctors in order to change your gender there in Greece. So in Poland, the first milestone sentence in the case of gender shifting was given by the Warsaw Voivode Court in 1964. So 1964, the court reasoned that it may be possible in face of civil procedure and acting on civil registry records to change one's legal gender after their surgery. So Poland allows this to happen. Republic of Ireland. Ireland passed the Gender Recognition Act of 2015, allows legal gender changes without the requirement of medical intervention. It's the United Kingdom, the Gender Recognition Act 2004 effectively granted full legal recognition for binary transgender people. This act does not require applicants to be post-operative. So you're seeing here lots of laws passing around the world, and especially in Europe, on what they would call a gender recognition. Canada, North America, in 2017, the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code was updated to include gender identity and gender expression as protected grounds from discrimination. So hate publications advocating and genocide. The bill also added gender identity and expression in the list of aggravating factors. Mexico in 2014, the Assembly of Mexico City unanimously approved a gender identity law. The law makes it easier for transgender people to change their legal gender. And under the new law, they simply have to notify the civil registry that they wish to change the gender information on their birth certificate. So it's kind of like a census. And you tell the census, this is who I am, and that's who they say they are. So here's a country that says, you say this is who you are. Okay, this is who you are. In Argentina in 2012, the Argentine Congress passed the gender law, which allows individuals over 18 to change their gender marker. First country to adopt a policy based entirely on individual autonomy. No letters, no doctors, none of that. Brazil, since 2009, changing legal gender assignment in Brazil is legal according to the Superior Court of Brazil. The public health system started providing free sexual reassignment operations in compliance with the court order. So maybe I'll move to Japan, or Brazil now can pay for my surgery. Although I had mine in 2003, I did pay for it. Chile bans all discrimination and hate crimes based on gender identity, gender expression. So the gender identity law, in effect since 2019, recognizes the right to self-perceived gender identity, allowing people over 14 years of age to be able to change their names officially on their documents. South America and Colombia, a Colombian person may change their legal gender name and manifesting their solemn before a notary. So no surgeries or judicial order required. So go to your local notary public and change that documentation. It's legal in Colombia. Peru, in Peru, transgender persons can change their legal gender name after complying with certain requirements, may become psychological, psychiatric evaluation. So there's work to be done in Peru there. Uruguay, since the approval of the comprehensive law for trans persons in 2019, transgender people can self-identify their gender and update their legal name without approval from a judge. Additionally, and this is one that I love the most, this law created scholarships for trans people to access education. Imagine that. So in Oceania, Australia, passports are issued in their preferred gender without requiring a change to birth certificates or citizenship certificates. So if you want to travel in Australia, but you didn't change your licenses or any IDs, you can get your passport with your designated gender identity right there on your thing. In 2017, the family court issued a ruling that in cases where there's no dispute, hormone treatment can be prescribed to transgender children without a court permission. In some countries, especially here in the United States, you need a court order sometimes, especially if parents don't agree. Guam, gender changes are legal in Guam. In order for transgender people to change their legal gender, they just provide the Office of Vital Statistic a sworn statement from a physician. New Zealand, currently the Human Rights Act in 1993 does not explicitly prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender, whilst it's believed that gender identity is protected under the laws preventing discrimination on the basis of either sex or sexual orientation. In other words, they don't really feel it's a problem, so there is no law, so they don't see you as anything other. So this is the legal recognition of non-binary gender throughout multiple countries. So multiple countries do legally recognize non-binary or third gender classifications. So let's take a look at some of that. Here's a map. And so if you look at the blue, these are where third gender option is available as a voluntary opt-in. And notice there that we have some blue in the United States. So in other words, in these states that are blue, you can actually put like a non-binary or third gender option on your legal documents. Yellow, there is an opt-in for intersex people only. These are people who medically are recognized as intersexed. Orange is a standard for third gender, as you see there over in India, there's where it's orange, and red is the standard for intersex. So we see that all the way through Chile. And gray, of course, there's no data, there's nothing happening. So there's a lot of gray still in the world. So you can see there's still a lot of work to be done. So any questions? We kind of rushed through that. We've got 5 minutes left. I'm sure our heads are blowing up. Hi, this is Bridget.
Hi, Rich. How you doing? And you know, the interesting thing is that while belonging to the World Association of Sexology, and it's very important because a lot of people have family members from around the world, please check with the World Association of Sexology and please take a look because a lot of people need information. The other thing is that some people have children in different parts of the world. Some people have family members. And the other part is I don't want to give the impression, well, the good news about laws are that it's important for people, but it doesn't mean it's easy to transition, which is why it's important. While you can be recognized, that may not mean that your family or yourself is going to be so easy in making those changes, which is why you have the dream team on that as well. So we want to be sure to also state the dream team is very important in this transitioning as well. So I'm really glad you did great, Jessica. Woo!
Oh my. Well, listen, if you really want to get the full presentation, I do encourage you to take one of our courses at transgendercertification.com. You're just getting kind of a little taste of some of the information that we give you in a 52-hour-long course. You know, we didn't really go over so much about transitioning at the workplace because there's a whole process for some people who transition in the workplace. I transitioned at the workplace before there were any laws in place for me. Back in 1995 and 96, I was starting to transition in the workplace, and I had to develop policy, you know, at the place of my employment at the time. You know, court cases on winning custody of your children, these things I had mentioned earlier. I had, you know, a situation with my own children that I had to prove what was in the best interest of my kids, which I essentially did and got custody of my own children. So in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I'd like to open it up for whatever questions you may have. I'd love to, you know, we went through a lot of this material really quickly, but I'd love to hear some thoughts and any questions that you might have. So go ahead.
Thank you, Gillian, because you came up with job pay, but also you see what you get, what you don't. And one of the things that happens is that when people transition, sometimes they may lose, and Jessica, I'll be interested in seeing what your comments. Sometimes some people who transition from a male pay scale to a female, if they have those differences, I always think of money, belief systems, like, do I believe the women on the staff, I don't care whether they're trans or whether they're cisgender, do I believe them as much credence, and also protection, safety? And so it's interesting to see when you transition about moving into, did you see any differences, Jessica, in pay?
Yeah, so we you know, as a woman now who's typically perceived as a cisgender woman, fortunately for me, I'm not necessarily clocked as somebody who's transgender. You know, I did transition on the job back in 1995, as I just mentioned a second ago. When I did, it was a very difficult process for me because I was transitioning and going through a divorce at the same time and going through a custody battle with my children, and things were just very challenging for me. But I was a zone manager for a music company, and I used to travel with this music company. Whenever I would travel, I found it as an opportunity to be a little more gender neutral in presentation whenever I'd be in a new state. Nobody knew me there. It'd be a new staff of people, and you know, they'd have their own expectations of me. And it would not be unusual for somebody on the staff to misgender me, if you will, and use gender pronouns that were maybe more feminine in nature. So there was once I was in Ohio that the vice president of the company called to come and look for me at a particular store I was at there. And when the employee answers the phone and the vice president says, and I went by the name of JC, it can be a very androgynous name. That was my nickname. And so when the vice president asked the employee, hey, is JC in the store right now? The employee said, oh, no, she's not. I think she's at the hotel room. Maybe I'll give her a message to call you tomorrow. All these she's and hers. Vice president, you know, turns around and goes over to the human resources director and says, hey, who did we send to Ohio again? Wasn't it Jesus Lamb? And so, but he basically let that go because he knew I had long hair and, you know, oh, maybe she was just confused, this particular employee. Flash forward a couple months later when I'm at a manager's conference, the vice president, I came in there with a tie, khaki pants. I mean, as not necessarily super masculine, but I was in appropriate, clothing that would be designated for males, but with long hair. But there was certainly something that was more feminine about me. And the vice president said, okay, this is why they confused pronouns on this person. So I'll never forget, in the middle of a meeting, a big meeting with all the general managers there, he pulls me into a private room, kind of gives me one of these things, says, come on over here, and sat me in a room with the human resources director and 2 other people in the room. So there was 4 people in this room and me. 2 of those people, I have no clue who they were. They were sitting in the back. I believe they were just sitting there to be witnesses. And they presented me. Now, I should preface this in saying I was one of their stellar employees. I was one always with high marks. I was one that they respected very much, which is why I did traveling with them, and which is why I went to different stores. And here they were presenting me with a write-up slip on violating dress code policy. And this is when the story was told to me about the time I was in Ohio and I was misgendered as in female pronouns, according to my employer at the time. And so in this moment in time, now for most transgender people, they would stand up and say, well, I am transgender, I'm a woman, and I have every right to be this way, blah, 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 and defend themselves. And in that moment, I chose to put myself in the shoes of my employer. Now, remember, there were no laws at the time protecting my rights. I was afraid of my job. And basically I said, listen, this, not that I need to disclose to you about my personal life. This is what's going on in my personal life. I'm going through a divorce. I've decided to change my gender identity. If you need me to come and bring you some letters from a therapist, again, going to my dream team of the time, I'm happy to present this. So I came to a place with them saying, listen, I am a team player. I'm here to work for you. If I'm not doing my job properly, then tell me. And they could not tell me that I was not doing my job. It was just my presentation that was an issue. Would it be any different if I was in a wheelchair or if I was horribly disfigured in one way, shape, or another? No. Okay, so perhaps my appearance is not as important than what I'm able to contribute to my job. So they told me, okay, wear your hair in a ponytail, no makeup, and until further news, you have to try to adhere as close to possible. And I said, fine, that is fine, but just so that you know, this is what I'm going through. Flash forward, when my name change came through and all that, I presented to my employers, and I'll never forget a call from my human resource director saying, well, from this day forward, Miss Jessica, you will now present in female. So essentially, I created policy for this company. What I did notice was a difference with my coworkers, my co-managers, if you will, people who are in the system there. And when you talk about a glass ceiling for women, I actually felt that glass ceiling, because at some point the people that had come after me started getting paid more than I was, and I was very, very concerned about that. And what was interesting too for me at the time was that men were starting to open doors for me. That was kind of something very strange for me to experience. So.
That's an important part about this and the question is about, a lot of people do not transition on the job. So that part is very unique. Other people do transition on the job and they find there could be like this discrepancy, which is why HR is very important. You want to see your policies with the HR people, or if you're going to universities, you want to see their policies about it. And also, and the opening doors is it's very interesting to move from one, even though we like to think, oh, let's all be equal. My husband pulls out the chair for me. I mean, I pull out a chair for him too, but he would pull out the chair for me, which I think is kind of cool. But would I pull out a chair for him? Sure. But the interesting thing is what happens when you make that shift, and money is one, but also thank you, Jessica, to see how people respond to you.
Absolutely. And when it comes for trans men, the experience for them that I have seen increasingly happen is there's this sort of club that men belong to, and it's very testosterone and very, very sort of aggressively driven, if you will. And a lot of times, coming from an experience living their life mostly in a designation of female and having transitioned into a boys club, Many of these trans men sometimes have a hard time sort of adjusting to that sort of thing, and maybe sort of overcompensate at times. So it's always a unique experience. Ask any trans person their experience. They're going to tell you something a little different. But I will tell you that it is a process. And these gender binaries that our world experiences, as a trans person, we experience that doubly. And we really see it firsthand, which is why back in Native American culture times, they were celebrated and said, oh my gosh, how unique an experience you have, that you experience life both as a man and a woman. You certainly must have some knowledge that you can give us here, right? I often get the question, hey, so you had an operation, right? So before the operation, when you had a penis, and now after the operation that you don't have a penis and you have a neo-vagina, what was better? How do you feel? You know, where do you get most pleasure? Which to always I respond, listen, when I was a boy, you gave me a magazine in 10 minutes and I can probably get to where I wanted to go. But as a woman, you have to wine me, dine me, and make me feel pretty to get where I want to go. But it's just certainly an experience for a person. Nico asked just a second ago, is an attorney necessary to be in the dream team, or could a mediator get involved for legal documents? Either or. It's always great to have an attorney on your side, but certainly a mediator is somebody who can be there. There's like a big brother, big sister sort of thing that happens in some cases at support groups with trans individuals or gender variant people or gender expansive individuals. Anyhow, and a lot of times, you know, they sort of partner with each other to give them, pieces of advice on how to move through different things. And a lot of times, you know, Marilyn mentioned early the Go With Me program.
Right.
So
Right.
this is why it's important to have, listen, it doesn't matter whether you're transgender or not. It's important to have people in your life who are on your side, who are people you can call on and depend on and be there for you. This is all basic human nature. For a trans person, it's experienced much more deeply because for most of their life, they have not been seen. And they are people who are not seen and who have felt small in some cases.
Right.
So
You know, and invisible. And if you can find somebody, which is why finding that group that can say things, certainly attorneys, they specialize in different things. And there are attorneys who are really knowledgeable in these areas. So yes, if you can find an attorney who can advise, you know, in these areas, like any specialty in law. So again, you want to find that. And if you need somebody, we have the names of people, our ITCA group. So I just want you to say there are wonderful people, or the P flag group. So please use those resources as well.
well, Marilyn, oops, we did it again. We went over as we
Ah,
normally do, but hopefully this topic interests you. Hopefully you become an ally for this community. You are wonderful individuals for sitting here and paying attention to our presentation. And hopefully you'll take a nugget of information here and be able to apply it in your everyday lives and be a greater ally to this gender expansive
and
community.
for those of you who are first responders, I want to say thank you. Cisgender, transgender, whatever, thank you for your service, especially at these times. Thank you so much, so much. Thank you.
And I thank you all for being here. And we do have on chat the contact for Jessica and some other things. And Marilyn, can we put you down for your contact? What would it be?
I always tell people to be safe. So it's
Right.
be safe, MV at Gmail. Be safe, MV at Gmail.
Be safe, mv at gmail.com. Okay, well, we thank you both and we look forward to seeing all of you again next week, week 4, the last, which will be a summation.
That's
And
right.
there'll be some very interesting aspects in there that we haven't touched upon and we have touched upon. So it's going to be sort of putting the ball together and seeing things.
I'm going to give you a timeline, which is going to be very fascinating for you to see next week. So
Yeah.
tune in next week. You're going to want to see this timeline.
Yes, you
It's
do.
fascinating. And so please come with questions, comments, because next week will be that very interactive based on what Jessica and Marilyn are going to share with us. Thank you again, everybody.
Welcome. You're welcome. Bye-bye. Be safe. Be safe. Bye-bye.
Aloha.
Aloha.